Hi, greetings from the Nellie Bly Bus. A lot of people have asked me about the name, and so this post is going to be about that. I promised that I would share why I named her the Nellie Bly Bus. It seems as though people with campers name their camper just like they name boats, and some people name cars. So once I bought this 2008 Ford 350X, I decided to name it, and I went in search of a good name. I wanted a name that reflected a little bit about me, my life, what I was looking for in a bus. So I knew that I was seeking adventure and a little bit of free spiritness. So I went to Google and I searched women explorers or women adventurers. I forget which I used. And I came across the name Nellie Bly. Well, I instantly loved the name. It's just Nellie Bly. It's a cool name. I love alliteration. So to be the Nellie Bly Bus just triggered something in my brain. But of course I wanted to do a little research to find out who Nellie Bly was. I'd heard the name, but I really wasn't familiar with her. What an amazing, incredible woman was Nellie Bly. Nellie lived in the late 1800s. 1888 is when she made her claim to fame. She was not born Nellie Bly. I even forget what her real name is. But when she was 18 years old in her small town, the newspaper published an article that wrote about the abomination of women, girls, that want an education and that want to work, and how horrible this is, because we all know what girls are good for, and that is to marry a man that wants them, to take care of his house, to give him children, and that is what girls are good for. And so this young woman was absolutely appalled at this and wrote a scathing response and sent it to the newspaper. She used the writing name of Nellie Bly. Well, the editor was so impressed with the writing. Long story short, Nellie Bly was offered a job and became a regular columnist for the newspaper. Well, Nellie was not at all content writing social fluff pieces. Rather, she right away became an investigative journalist. Women did not do that. But she would work in a factory and wrote about the deplorable conditions in a factory. She wrote about what it's like for a woman to go through a divorce in the 1880s from the perspective of the wife, which you can imagine. She heard about how people in Mexico, how the elected officials in Mexico were living like kings while their people were living in abject poverty. So she went to Mexico and lived there for a while and wrote about that and did an expose on that. So here she is in the 1880s being sort of like a female Geraldo Rivera long before women had any type of right like this. At one point she wondered what went on here in this strange, ugly building called the Women's Asylum for Lunatics on Blackwell Island, an insane asylum for women. So she pretended to be crazy. She got herself committed, which was surprisingly easy, and got admitted to the insane asylum on Blackwell Island. She stayed there for 10 days and just observed. She saw women that had been committed for no other reason except that they didn't speak English, and people thought they were crazy, talking gibberish. She wrote about women that had a spell where they couldn't stop crying after they had a baby. She wrote about women that were there that were clearly mentally retarded. She wrote about women that shouldn't be there, and wrote about just the incredibly horrific conditions of treatment for these women. And she claimed that if you were not mad when you went in, you soon would be. After 10 days, her publisher came and retrieved her. No one there knew she was a reporter, but she came out and wrote a scathing expose about the treatment of women with mental illness. And it absolutely hit the world like crazy. Suddenly there was funding and legislation and all sorts of attention, and it absolutely revolutionized the treatment of mental health. Thanks, Nellie Bly. Somewhere along the lines, she had read Jules Verne's book, Around the World in 80 Days. So she went to her publisher and said, "This is a work of fiction, but I would like to see if it's possible." And her publisher said, "Hell no. Women do not travel unescorted." And said, "Nellie, you don't even speak any other language but English. How are you going to get around the world?" Again, long story short, she talked her publisher into it. And in 1884, I believe, at the age of 24 years old, she left Newark, New Jersey with 2 small satchels, crossed the Atlantic, went through England, went through France, went through Europe, went through Sri Lanka, went through the Middle East, went through China, all 100% on her own, no escort. She sent back little updates to the paper. The world followed her as she did these travels. And indeed, 72 days later, she returned to Newark. So she did it in less than 80 days. Wrote another book called Around the World in 72 Days. By the way, her first book was 10 Days in a Madhouse. At this point, she had a fair amount of fame. The paper was getting a lot of good publicity from her. So she demanded to be paid the same as a man reporter. And she was not. So she quit. She decided to go into the world of industry. She actually married an older man that was in manufacturing. But Nellie still tried to turn her attentions on making the world a better place. And a big problem that she was aware of is rat infestation in the cities. So she designed and had made a metal garbage can with a snug fitting lid. That was her design, her invention, and of course it still exists today. So when you see a metal garbage can, we can thank Nellie Bly. But so after several years in manufacturing and design, she has several patents for great inventions, some that are still existing. Journalism called to her, especially in the events of the day, which were the suffrage movement. So she took to the streets and she reported on the suffrage movement. Shortly after that, she actually went to Europe and lived in the bunkers, in the trenches with the soldiers during World War I. Nellie was the first, and for a very long time only, female war correspondent. So that's just a little snippet of Nellie's life. Not only does it sound cool, the Nellie Bly Bus, I can think of no one else who better emulates the courage to be a trendsetter, to be a strong, accomplished woman in a man's world in the 1880s, and to care about the world, care about people, give voices to people that are being mistreated. And so, in honor of the courage and bravery and compassion and empathy and spirit of adventure of Nellie Bly, I christen my bus the Nellie Bly Bus.